Well, hello and welcome. And today's big conversation, we are looking at the supplementary budget. The Sanahene of Ghana, the Minister of Finance, went to Parliament as the law permits him to do, to go and ask that Parliament grants him permission to spend a bit more money, approximately 1.888 billion Ghana cedis, so that he can see us through. I'm sure some of the money will go to pay for crude, wages, whatever it is that he needs to pay for. At least we'll see him through to the end of the year. We're going to look at the culture of supplementary budget, and I'll have people in the house to educate me. Is there ever going to be a time where from January some think tanks will sit and say, listen, we're definitely going to need 2 billion by the end of the year, not 1 billion, and then come again and say, oh no, you know what? I said 1 billion, but I'm lying. I need a bit more. You look at crude prices, you're going down. You look at your projections and you know, look, this thing is going to go down. If I sell, I'm not going to get some. I mean, how does it work within the economic fraternity? As you know, I'm Nana Sakwa the fourth. My economic degree is only from Edumasan. So I have people in-house whose economic degree is, much more bigger than mine. And when I come back from the break, you're going to explain to us, number one, how is it that our money is always finished midway? And number two, if we are not exporting enough and we are importing so much, are we ever going to balance this economy? I don't know. Stay tuned, I'm coming straight back. Well, thank you very much for staying. And the conversation indeed is one of those that I doubt if one show can do it, but we will try. We will try. Government wants 1.8 billion, nearly 1.9 billion cedis in addition to the 2016 budget. Indeed, we're going to find out if we've ever balanced our budget before, but God knows. But with me in the studio is Dr. Lord Mensah, who is a lecturer in economics at University. Finance and Investment.
Ghana Business School.
Ghana Business School, there you go. And then joining us in a very, very short while is Kweku Krating, who's a member of the Finance Committee in Parliament and also the Honorable Member of Parliament for Bekwai. So at this moment, I will take a quick break and invite into the studio my second guest. Okay, now let me go straight here. I'm sure due to technicalities, due to the magic of radio, we're sneaking in without you knowing. But Doc, is there, for my first question, can there be a time where, like in January, you can just study the weather and see that, listen, I would need X amount to the end of the year? Looking at A, B, C, D, the oil block guys are flooding the market with oil, so oil will drop. You look at some disagreement between some two countries, so look, these guys are going to fight, therefore this will happen, and therefore this is what I need to the end of the year. If let's say you say you needed 10 million, and by the end of the year you only use 7, I mean, you have 3.
Yeah, you're right, Nana. I understand that perfectly. If you look at budget, budget basically is about projections of your expenses and then the revenue that you intend to generate as a country and how you spend it. But then I see this as a projection, and in the end, projection comes with uncertainties, of course. But then what you can judge or you can assess someone who is well finance oriented is how far is the projection from the actualization, and that is what we need to look at from the budget that was read. Now you look at this carefully and you realize that for the past 3 years it has been times that we have to do a budget review every midway of the year, and you ask yourself, would there be a time that again that people will trust the actual budget that we read at the end of the year going into the next year? So in as much as we understand that budgets are basically projections going into the future, And then also looking at unforeseen circumstances that might come with it. We don't expect the actualization to be far from the projections that is being made. So as a finance minister who is an expert in finance, and looking at the ministries that feed into your budget, I expect that you don't drive far away from your projections. So the realization of the projections should be closer. And that is what we see. Now, we can see from this particular budget that last 2015, that was December, when the minister was reading the budget, most of the projections were made based on crude oil price of about $55 per barrel. And as of that time when the budget was being read, it was around $20 per barrel. And if you look at the upwards adjustment in prices, normally it takes time for you to get that adjustment. And I told myself that definitely we have to come back for a review of the budget because all these projections will not be realized. And you can see from the last 6 months, the maximum, if I remember very well, to be recorded for crude oil price is not more than $50 per barrel, which in the end, you're falling short if you are to export. And then also if you are importing, of course, you will not meet the projections that you did. So definitely looking at all those things and then also the commodity market, the ups and downs, you will definitely go back to Parliament and ask for a review. But then it has been happening consecutive times. And my worry is that a time may come that the actual budget that is being read, Ghanaians will not look at it with a critical eye because they know obviously the minister will come back for a review.
Kwekukati, welcome.
Thank you.
Look, now you understand numbers. And with numbers, there's so much uncertainties. But there are certain things which, I mean, from this side of the world, like you look at your currency, you calculate how much your currency is falling, and therefore each time you would need more to import things. We're exporting crude. We knew what the prices were. I mean, is there any way you could get a right estimate on the budget to say, look, looking at what lies ahead, look, I need X amount of money to see me through. And that if anything at all, maybe I said I needed 10 billion, but maybe I use 9 or I use 8.5 and hey, there's your balance, 2.5. I didn't use it or I'm not going to spend that money. Can that be possible, or in economics terms, I'm asking for too much?
Well, first, good evening to viewers, and particularly good evening to the people of my constituency. Sorry, I'm late. I guess right here from Parliament, we're still looking at those bills that have to be looked at before we go on recess on Friday. So, pardon me, I'm late. Yes, you're always going to have difficulty predicting accurately what the future would be like. No matter how experienced you are, you could have unforeseen events come up, and that would call for a budget review. But we ought to appreciate that your ability to predict accurately would reflect how much benefit you get from good planning. If you're not very good, you just think that the future is unknown anyway, and you do not make accurate projections, it comes back to hurt you, because then it means the planning on the basis of which you would have allocated resources for about half a year was not adhered to. And it's almost as though you didn't plan. So whilst appreciating that it is always going to come up, that your predictions may not be accurate, we ought to attach the fact that the more accurate you are, the better the effect of your planning. That has to be understood. You see, on this occasion, if you look at the reasons why there was this review, it was not just in respect of a drop in crude oil prices. It was also because the revenues from the energy sector levies that were imposed were not captured in the 2016 budget statement. And therefore, once that tax was imposed and the money was realized, then government needed to come to Parliament for approval to spend the money. So the question you ask is, look at our energy sector and the difficulties we've had with our energy sector. And government needed to consolidate all the taxes in the energy sector, and as we have come to know now, add more. Is this something that should be seen as unpredictable? Is that the plans we have for our energy sector? That you bring an important instrument such as a comprehensive review of your energy sector levies. You are adding more, and we all saw the impact. And mid-year, government comes to say, at the time I hadn't anticipated. So it calls into question government, how well government has been doing in planning the sectors. Because the imposition of energy sector levies is not, it's something you should plan, you should time, so that maybe it starts at the beginning of the year. From what has happened, it tells me that perhaps somebody just got up and said, look, next week, let's impose this wide range of taxes. And therefore, it was not accounted for in the budget. So I conclude on the point that as much as possible, you should swim close to your plans. And if you leave it to the few unforeseens, you will not need to always be reviewing. There might be unforeseen events, but your economy may have the shocks to deal with them. So I think on this occasion, we could have done better. And I'm disturbed that the revenues from the energy sector levies, the expenditure of it is one of the reasons why we have had to do a budget review. I think we could have avoided that.
If in the layman's terms, which means when the levies were imposed, the state wasn't sure how much they were going to get to say, look, we will get X from this amount, and therefore we want to spend XA or XB out of it.
But well, if you're going to impose taxes, you must have a rough idea how much it would generate, because that will help you determine the rates. Yes, you decide how much you need. You must consider how much would be too much for the taxpayers. What level, I mean, you should strike the balance between the impact on your taxpayers and the fiscal impact on your planning. You should balance it out well, and that comes with careful planning and evaluation of how much a tax intervention will yield. So if it is because we didn't know, then it first suggests that we are probably not planning well. I think this particular energy sector levy should never be a reason for a review. That's a view I take. I don't think there's any justification for it. It's government's intervention. You time when you want the intervention.
But could it not have been that, the original projection was to take us to the end of the year? We added levies, but somewhere, to the end of the year, the money's got finished, and therefore we need to go and fall back on it. Otherwise, this money could have been there till next year before it appears in the 2017 budget.
Yeah, once we didn't take that into account, and yet went ahead and imposed those taxes, and did a comprehensive consolidation of some other taxes, there was bound to be money that Parliament did not know about, put it in technical terms. And therefore, it was always going to be necessary for government to come and spend, unless throughout the year it did not want to spend. And when you have a government that, as we'll come to see in the budget, slashing social contributions, slashing capital expenditure, slashing goods and services, it tells you clearly that this is a government whose whose money matters are in difficulty, and therefore this money was never going to sit like that. They were bound to come to Parliament for the review. So I think that in future, government should do things more systematically and methodically, so that we are clear that government knows what it's doing. It is timed that it will not upset our plans. It's important that we learn this lesson from what has happened.
Let me come to Dr. Mensah. Dr. Mensah, you see, government has to be prudent. And therefore, with this budget, they are slashing things here and there. But in the same time, we need to grow. As a finance and investment, how do you slash and grow, at the same time?
Well, it's when it comes to budget, it's what you generate that would determine. Normally, we combine revenue and expenditure. But then if you don't generate the revenue, what you spend on will be difficult. So for me, I believe that like we were discussing when the budget was about to be read in 2015, December. I mentioned that we should go for a moderate kind of budget because most of the revenue target that if we turn up to be over-optimistic, and we understand that the finance minister himself is more or less wearing two hats, being a politician at the same time, a technocrat who is managing our economy. So I was expecting that when they are doing the projections in terms of our revenues, they should drop one hat, which is the political one, and in the end look at the technical aspect of it, so that they will not be too over-optimistic. We know politicians are, somehow over-optimistic in terms of the future. So if you overestimate, obviously you might not get, those estimations, and in the end, it will call for review. And going for review means that you have to slash, most of this growth or projections that, or some of the infrastructure development that you promise the people. So I foresee a situation where you promise yourself, and in the end, you realize that most of the figures that you quoted might not be realized. So you go back to the people in a form of review, where if you remember from some of his statement that he made during the presentation, he said even the 1.88 is not like a billion that is calling for the budget, the parliament to approve, might not go into all the sectors that he's looking out for. There are some key sectors that will go into. But then you realize that he's more or less looking at sensitive areas that he wants to touch on. So I believe that you make the projections, but then you're not supposed to be too over-optimistic when it comes to revenue generation.
The economy has grown, according to the finance minister, 4.5% this year, far better than it was last year. Greek has done, I think, 2.5 rather than 1.7. Service is doing 8% rather. But yet we are all complaining. So, I mean, are we just being unfair to the state? Why is this growth,
not reflecting in the people's
not reflecting?
life.
Everybody's emailing me for a job, and so aren't they seeing where the growth is? Help us out.
There's no growth. There's no growth. It's as simple as that. I mean,
that's too MPP. That's too MPP.
I'm being as technical as I can.
Yes, I want your technical
side. That's right.
In the year 2000, without oil, Ghana's economy grew by 3.7%. We increased our real GDP growth rate gradually. By the close of 2008, we did 9.1%. In 2011, when the oil we had discovered in 2007 came on stream, we did 14%. Today, we're doing, 4-point-something percent. And you say this is growth?
Because from 3.25 or something, isn't it? So from 3.25 to 4 point, whatever it is, So not from your 14, but
within a space of 5 years. And if you disaggregate it into oil and non-oil, you just see a downward trend. The question we ought to be discussing is not that there is some growth and where is it. The question we should be discussing is what has accounted for this slowdown in our growth so that we can deal with it. When you have energy sector difficulties and your companies are unable to produce as they should, they're laying off workers. Part of the reason government is not realizing their revenue, and it's reflected in the supplementary budget, is the fact that when economic activities are slow, you are not going to get a revenue. Is this really the time we should be discussing some growth that if you didn't acknowledge, then you are being too NPP? No. I think we had to face the hard fact. There's something fundamentally wrong with our economy. Government, as far as I can see, is overspending its means. And therefore, money that should be freed for the private sector to use and grow the economy is not available. Government is now borrowing from the domestic market and driving interest rates up, so that not only are businesses suffering and unreliable power supply, interest rates are high. Then we have had more than we have ever done taxes. If you look at the taxes, the special petroleum tax, that was 17.5%. That was slapped on petroleum, which was effectively slapped on other taxes. So you were paying taxes on the tax you pay, because that is calculated like a VAT. After everything, you slap it, so that the tax element has cascading effect. You have so many taxes. So if you speak with Association of Ghana Industries now, they will tell you that you're operating in a very hostile business environment. When you have that situation, it is naive to think that somehow there will be some magic and there will be some growth and turnaround. It's never going to happen. And look, the difficulties people are experiencing, and everybody is telling you times are hard, times are hard. It is because our fiscals are not right. We are overspending our means, and in that over expenditure, if you go to the Auditor General's report, is the waste that we have been complaining about since Adam. And here we can be candid. It's not just under this administration, even though things are getting worse. Anytime you look at our Auditor General's report, the waste in the public sector, plus there's an element on this occasion also of laziness. Government in 2013 said that, look, in order to curb my expenditures, there are some state enterprises that need not, whose workers need not be on the central government payroll. That is to say, DVLA. Whenever the DVLA comes to Parliament to defend the allocation government makes to them, and you look at your books, it's clear to you that this is an enterprise that can pay itself. And so government in 2013 said that DVLA, Energy Commission, and initially there were 10, including the universities. Subsequently, we're told that there's difficulty in really working out the transition, so it was limited to 3: DVLA, Environmental Protection Agency, and then Energy Commission. 2 years on, that was when we were having the homegrown policies. 2 years on, these agencies are still on public sector payroll. And you remember the rot we saw in DVLA. So what I'm saying is that, look, the economy is not stupid. You cannot continue to do all these things wrong. And if we will go back a bit, when we created for ourselves additional 45 members of parliament, when we created for ourselves additional districts, creating chief executives, setting up offices, and we kept expanding the public sector, what were we expecting? Now, things are catching up with us, and we're beginning to see the absence of money for central government to do the things that it ought to do, for the environment to be free, for the private sector to operate. And this supplementary budget, and after slashing and slashing and slashing, government says, still, you need to allow me to go and borrow. In addition to the energy sector levies, government is also just borrowing as much, because it's about 2 billion. There's half is going to come from the energy sector levies, half is going to come from borrowing. Our interest on the money we have borrowed, interest payment, is now the second largest expenditure. Look, the writings are very clear on the wall that our economy is increasingly getting sick and sick and sick, and until we are bold, not only to cut the corruption, but also to do the reforms in the public sector that would make government's expenditure manageable, we are never going to get out of this. And please, let's not start discussing growth and where is the benefit. There's none. We are in difficulty, and we need to deal with the crisis.
Let me take a break here, and then when I come back, we see how we deal with the crisis. Don't move. Thank you very much for staying, and we are looking at government wanting permission, basically, to spend 1.8 billion as a supplementary budget. But before then, let me remind you that the second Renewable Energy Fair 2016, funny enough, just before we started, Doctor and I were talking about the solar aeroplane that's just gone around the whole world. So the Energy Commission and the Ministry of Power present the second Ghana Renewable Energy Fair from 9th to 11th of August 2016 at the Accra International Conference Center from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. daily. The theme, renewable energy and energy efficiency, accelerating energy access and security. Attractions will include a technical conference, solar marketplace, cook stoves, festival, and innovation center for all your renewable energy solutions. There will also be a field trip to Ghana's foremost renewable energy mini-grid site. To exhibit your renewable energy and energy-efficient solutions, please contact, write these numbers down, very important, 0205 181 799 or 050 000 4953. And remember, participation is free. Just call 0205 181 799 or 050 000 4953 to register. This event is partnered by UNDP, Volta River Authority, and ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Very soon, we'll be flying around the world in a solar plane, Doctor. So let's all participate. Doc, but on where Kweku landed, see, in my intro, I was saying that it's always been said that, this gorgeous Barian economy where we ship out, natural stuff and import them back in a finished good, and we're still doing that. We haven't revolutionized our industries yet. So what best can come out of an economy like that for it to reflect in a budget? I mean, how best do you manage such an economy where you're sending out less than you're bringing in?
Well,
should every economy send out more than they bring in? Because
it's not always like that.
Okay.
It's not always like that because you can be net import or you can be net export. So it depends on the situation.
So we are a net import.
Yeah, we are a net import.
So
country.
on that basis, what do we do to jazz up?
Well, if you are net import, you have to look at how you can balance it. Where you make sure that the few that you export, you grow it. I can give you a typical example with cocoa, which is one of our main products that we send out there. You realize that the technology that we use for, getting cocoa to dry up is the same technology since I was born. So I asked myself, with all the monies that comes to Cocoa Board, what are the investments that they've been doing in terms of not just the farm alone, as to how cocoa is being dried, not just using the sun or maybe kind of implementation to enhance, output, so that at the end of the day, we can in a way get closer to what we import in. So if we are a net import country and the gap between the export and the import is so huge, what are we doing? So we need to invest in the sectors that we believe that we export in, for instance, cocoa, so that at least we can bridge the gap between our export and then import.
You've raised really, really salient points as to the size of our purse and the appetite to keep increasing our expenditure by expanding government and our bureaucracy, and I think it's a whole show on its own. But my question to Doc was that this is what we have. So how best do we make of what we have now?
The gorgeous bed economy that you said we have, it's a situation many countries have suffered in the past. That's how you start. But we keep saying that we need to move away from there. So we need to add value to the things we produce. Okay. How are you going to add that value? It is not government that is going to do it to start with. It is the private sector that will do it because they export. So what is government's role? Government must create the enabling environment. In order that government would have the resources to create the enabling environment, government must make sure that its own existence does not become too expensive for the country. And that's what I mean by expanding the bureaucracies. If the very existence of government becomes so expensive, then the money that government ought to use to improve the environment for the private sector to export and to take us out of poverty, government is spending that money paying itself and servicing itself, and then we now have to go and borrow and be competing with the private sector. So not only are we unable, because of our circumstances, to help the private sector, we are actually competing with them because government needs the money to spend on government. Now, that is something we must fix, and that is the whole point I try to make. On this point about how we can export, The exporters need electricity. Why do we not have electricity? Electricity issues come in about 4 levels. You have the raw material issue, you have generators and the generation capacity issues, you have the transmission, which we don't have much problem with at the moment, and then you have the distribution. Right now, we are in darkness because the raw material matter has not been settled properly. So, money to now procure crude and gas to power installed capacity, which is bigger than what we consume, is not there, and we keep having this problem. So the consequence is that...
The state has never said it's money. They said they can't get the raw material.
That's right.
They can't get. So those other countries that get regular supply of raw material, how do they manage?
Maybe.
We should just travel to Botswana and ask them that we are so damned we cannot figure out how to do this. We want to see how you do it. It is not magic. In the past, we had this situation when Akosombo did not fail. Under both regimes, NPP and DC, whenever Akosombo did not fail, we said that there was a shortfall. And so we knew that as soon as the rains came, we will get back our power. Now it has become a way of life. We should ask ourselves, what is it that is happening? What is happening is that whereas demand is supposed to be increasing, we have not been designing strategies to deal with the supply side. And why? It is not that the plans are not there. The money is not there. The little money we are already, our manufacturing is not doing well. What it means is that the things you manufacture, which you would go and sell out there and make real money, foreign exchange to import those machineries you are not manufacturing and deal with your fundamental issues of business environment, that money is not there. And in the last 3 years and a half, almost 4 years I've been in Parliament, any time a new law has come and that law is creating a bureaucracy, the question I ask is, so this bureaucracy you are creating, and you are not doing anything, you are unable to expand your production, and where is the money going to come from? And until we come to terms with that. So the supplementary budget that was read now, if you look carefully, if I can go through it, we are slashing capital expenditure, the plans we made initially. We are slashing it. We are slashing goods and services.
Yes.
We are slashing even we call it social contributions. We are slashing that one too. We are slashing transfers into the National Health Fund. So government is essentially saying, I came to you at the beginning of the year with projections of how much money we'll be able to make. I have now realized that I was dreaming. That money is not there. And the way I'm going to deal with the shortfall is that not only will I slash all these expenditures, you also need to find me some additional money, part of which is energy sector levy, part of which is borrowing. So now government is going again to borrow. Your private sector is suffering. You government should be coming to their aid. You government, you are in trouble.
Yeah, but it's not surprised to see that they will go for borrowing, because if you look at the central bank when they came out with the monetary policy rate, with all the indications showing that inflation is going down, exchange rate has been stable for some time. We expect that monetary policy rate will come down, which is the basis of our, exchange interest rate. And you realize that it was kept. So definitely the government is still holding on the appetite for investors to bring their money. And for me, I'm not surprised with what Kweku is saying.
No, but well, the fact that you are a worker, and let's come to our everyday life. So you're a worker, and people see that you've just got a good job. And therefore, the banks start coming to you that, look, we can give you, come and borrow. And you don't make plans as to whether the borrowing is simply the environment exists for you to borrow simply because the local banks are happier lending to you, government, than lending to the private sector. You say that my appetite, the inflation is. In any case, this inflation that is dropping, where is it? This inflation drop, where is it? How is your inflation going to drop? What are the factors? Production is down.
Yeah, sure.
Any kind of inflationary drop we will see now can never be permanent. There is no magic about this. In order that your inflation will drop, you must produce. If you don't produce and you think by some manipulation of monetary policy, it's temporary relief. So the long and short, the point I'm making, long and short, is that it is about time we realize that the things that are happening now are happening because we have mismanaged ourselves in the past. And nothing is more annoying to me than to hear government say that there is a turnaround. A turnaround story. You come to Parliament to say that I can't do this, I'm slashing, I can't do this, I'm slashing. On top of that, I cannot hold body and soul together until you give me more money. And then the minister, instead of telling us that, look, let's put...
But you've talked about being prudent, and I think that's the first thing.
Prudent way.
That's a prudent way to say, look, I can't be giving you
cut
guys
your
money.
coat according to
So
what you
apart
have.
from education, everybody should
in my
suffer.
opinion, prudence is you have the money sitting there. You said that, look, this money, I can dole out. I can give freebies. I can do this. But I will not do that because I need to prioritize and invest the money in ways that will yield benefits in the future. That is prudence. Prudence is not when you can't survive and you go slashing expenditure, slashing capital expenditure. Now that you slash capital...
That's even more prudent. I mean, let me bring my investor, let me bring my finance investor. That's even more prudent. And I say that because I remember when David Cameron took power, he had taken over from Gordon Brown, who wanted to spend his way out of recession. And when Gordon Brown came, he says, no, I'm going to cut down out of recession. Yeah. And, district after district were just, some budgets were halved. And they give you the money and they said, apart from education, don't touch education. Exactly. How you survive, it's your own business. Sure. And I remember the Harrow Barrow, they lost 75 million pounds out of their normal budget. Apart from education, go. How you survive, it's not my point. And gradually, they were able to come out of it. So maybe that's what...
So, let me make this quick point before you come in. You see, if government sits down and says, I am reading a budget, this is going to be a prudent budget. So this one, the little money I have, I put it in these strategic areas. I do this, I do this. That is a prudent plan. It is completely different when government make plans that they consider that some 300 million additional investments into infrastructure will be helpful. And then they come in the middle of the year to say that the plan that I thought was good, that plan wasn't, at the moment, I cannot finance that good plan. So now...
That is when you don't realize your revenue margin.
Exactly, I agree with you. Yeah. Because you don't realize your revenue margin, because your companies are in distress and you're not realizing enough money, you now have to slash. You now have to slash. This kind of slash is imposed on you. It's not a planned slash. Otherwise, it should have come at the reading of the budget. It should come as part of government plans. When it is imposed on you, then it means you are cutting plans that you yourself thought were good.
But is there anything wrong in going back to
yes, I believe that with the budget, as you made reference to, they are all projections, and in the end, if you don't realize the revenues that you're supposed to meet for this infrastructure development, capital spending, and all those, definitely you are bound to come back to Parliament, which the Constitution gives you that right to look at the revenue targets that you will have, and then look at how you can reduce. But then, like you said, how do they come by these sectors that they are slashing the investment that are supposed to go there? That is what we need to look at, okay? Because the government cannot say they are slashing on capital spending, which to me, in election year, is quite questionable, because we believe that in politics, we believe that the people want to see the physical before we gain their vote. So capital spending, for me, I don't buy into it. But then what I believe in is that if you make projections in terms of a budget where you know your revenue, which will call for the expenditure, and if you don't realize those figures, obviously, I mean, you have to, look at it.
Look, I don't disagree with that at all. I'm not saying that.
But don't you think they should have even cut even further?
Well, it's up to government. But what they did effectively is to cut up to a point. If they really didn't want to go and borrow, then they should have cut further. Right. But they just stopped at the point and say, the rest of the shortfall, we're going to make it up by borrowing and by... So, Doc, I don't disagree with you at all. That because they did not realize the revenue, I am saying that the non-realization of that revenue reflects a certain weakness in the economy.
No issues, of course. I mean...
So it is that weakness we need to deal with. But once the economy, because of those weaknesses and because of those shocks, fell into this difficulty, government had no choice. I don't disagree. I'm not saying that there could have been some other way for government. Government had no choice, but whether or not they've been cutting the expenditure at the right places is another question, because I have said that the 100 million Ghana cedis that we have allocated to youth employment, if you want to give jobs to your youth, go and talk to industry and tell them, it is you that will open job opportunities for our unemployed. Where are the strategic areas for which you need manpower? The government says, I'll partner you in training people. When you take 100 million, you go and dole it out to individuals in an election year. And we saw what happened with JIDA in 2012. In 2016, we are seeing the same 100 million being given to Youth Employment Agency, and they say youth in agriculture, and you dole money to them. And then who trains them? Is it the farmers that train these youth in agriculture? The youth who sit down and they direct them?
I'm sure
the point I am making is that government, of course, initiatives to empower your youth, skill training is not a bad idea. But when I look at where we are as a nation,
it's the approach.
This is not the time to make that kind of expenditure. How industry, after all, I'm landing. After all, even if you gave training to the youth and they are now skilled, the industry that will employ them is distressed because you cannot deal with power. Then how would the youth get employment? So I think that some of those expenditures are illegitimate expenditures. They are waste. And if government had been candid and said that, I now realize that things are really coming to a head, as the president said some time ago, it is now down to the bone. So I will cut some of these expenditures. That would have been better. But to be cutting pensions to old men and women, what kind of economic management is this?
It has not been implemented.
Well, this one says, I hear
they've cut already.
I hear we have exceeded our revenue collected target for the 3 quarters by 5%. So why then do we still need more money? When I come back, I'll go to my financial investor to explain it. But that's why we need only 2 billion. Otherwise, we would have probably needed 3 billion. But we're coming back. Thank you very much for staying. A very, very interesting subject. But Doc, I was coming to you that revenue projections and revenue collections, I mean, in times like this, it's very important. When it's, they've done well with regard to revenue collection. So, viewers want to know, why then do they need more money?
Yeah, you've done well with revenue collection, maybe 5% more, exceeded 5%.
Not really.
More. But in the end, what's at stake? What we're supposed to spend is what is more than what you have generated. Now, revenue is just generating it from the taxes and all those things that we do around. And basically, that is what they're talking about. So the country needs more than what we generate. And that is why we need more money. Because as a country, if you want to grow, or even your own business, if you want to grow, you can't grow from what you generate alone. Sometimes you need to look at external sources. So that is why Kweku was saying that the government is planning on borrowing. And that was the incentive why they did not reduce the monetary policy rate. And they're looking at borrowing from the local market, because the international front, obviously, the environment is not favorable for us, looking at all the indicators on the ground. So for me, we need more than what we generate, and that is why we're calling it for more money.
Google, this says, hi, good evening. I'm Andrew from Asenkrigwa, a student of Royal Media School of Excellence. Please, I want to know where we will be getting the money from, the 1.8 billion cedis as supplementary budget.
Well, government is saying that, just quick answer, government is saying that partly that is part of that money, about half of that money, it's about 2 billion, about 1 billion of that money will be coming from the energy sector levies. As I said, at the time the tax was being imposed, I think the budget had been read and the budget did not anticipate it, unfortunately. So that is money that is yet to be accounted for. And then the remaining half, government is saying that it will go and borrow. It will just go and borrow. So that's where the money is going to come from. But yes, okay.
But the borrowing is from the local market, or
from wherever you say.
From the external market or the local market.
I think it's from the domestic market. Because if you go to borrowing, you will see that the figure for borrowing from the domestic market has gone up.
It has gone up, yeah, sure.
If it's gone up, it means government intends now to borrow more. The private sector, they should be weeping.
This one says, Nana, the operational word in the definition of a budget is projection. So going in for some supplementary financing is allowed. I am, however, happy that the finance minister yesterday exposed the palpable lies by Omia and his NPP chaps like Kweku Kwating and others have been gallivanting around with in terms of Ghana's relationship with the IMF. The NPP has remained silent after the minister exposed again by Omia's baseless claims that Ghana's debt to GDP being far in excess of 70% mark was flatly exposed. I was also happy that the economy grew by 4.9% and by the end of May, more than government's 4.5% projection. Government is on course in delivering, transforming its promise. From Berima Kubaji in Jene. So that was from Berima Kubaji in Jene with regards to this figure. The central government has a different figure. Baumia has a different one. The finance minister has a different one with regards to how much we owe. There's always some technicalities.
There are no different figures. Today, I put a question to the people from the Ministry of Finance in Parliament. You know, government has been saying that when it borrows and it gives that money to state enterprises, the money ought not to sit in central government books. The money ought to sit in the books of those state agencies. Yeah. And that the practice where you capture all those debts under central government debt gives an impression that government has borrowed excessively. The question we should be asking is for government to also publish the debts of these state agencies so that we see what kind of presentation we are doing. So if central government debt is going up, is going down, and state enterprises debt going up, then you know that some shifting around is happening. And what we are seeing would be nothing but tickling ourselves and laughing. I want to have a more comprehensive view of what the public debt, including that of the SOEs, are, because I suspect that some of the debt that previously would have been captured by the center is now being considered as debt in the books of, say, VRA. But let's face it, if VRA is indebted, it falls into difficulty, it cannot generate power. That headache is not for VRA, it's for all of us and for government. So I don't just buy these indications of, and please, to even land. Government itself never said debt is going down. It said debt to GDP ratio. I want to see what GDP you're using, because you see sometimes the GDP you use, if it is projected GDP, for instance, at the end of the year, it means you're using even a higher GDP than you ought to. But really, all these should not even bother us that much. Nobody should tell you whether it is now 65% or it is what. Nobody should tell you that when your debt servicing, interest payments is the second largest expenditure following closely after wages, it's clear signal that you're in trouble. You can play around and say that it is now accumulating more slowly. Now you see big English. They say that not that our debt has stopped accumulating, but it's now accumulating more slowly than it did in the past. Look, let's
are being slow.
That we are adding on, but we are not adding on as quickly as. The simple question is that Ghana is for all of us. The gentleman who sent that message, when we make these points, of course, I'm a politician. And I like to criticize, I don't mind criticizing government and all that, but it is not everything that political opponents say, because we also have a responsibility to appeal to people like Doc, who will listen to you and consider whether the opposition people are making sense. So when we communicate, we try to also be credible. I'm saying that our debt level right now, whether we are accumulating slowly or not, there needs to be a radical approach to cutting government expenditure and reducing the burden on government to go and borrow and compete with the private sector. We need to do that.
I mean, Doc, I mean, this is where we are, and maybe this question should have gone to Kweku, but let me ask you, even if it wasn't Mahama and it was Nanado and the NPP power, I mean, where would they get the money from? Well, we are not generating the money.
Of course, that's a good question to call for. If you are not producing, obviously you won't generate more.
And you cut your expenditure.
And you cut your expenditure, but you complain of
But
slicing.
you're complaining
you plan. you don't plan and
You
then
complain of slicing.
No, Doc, don't misinterpret that.
Right.
You don't plan and say that money will go.
Are you penalizing that he planned too late?
I'm saying that what is happening is a therapy.
Yep.
Government must sit down at the beginning of the year and say that, like I said, DVLA, you the chief executive, you don't need to set up committees. If you call our land now, you call the chief executive of DVLA, and if he's listening to this program, if I were the president, I say, look, 6 months, I want to take your workers off public sector payroll. Can you do it or you can't? If you can't, I say, go there, go home, let somebody who can come and do it. Unless we adopt that attitude and get public sector expenditure to go down. That's what I mean by slashing. It's not just planning to and slashing pension payments to old men and women. That is not
right. But then, like you were asking, where we as a country get the money from? Obviously, we as a country, we get our monies from taxes. Okay, we get monies from our exports that we do, and of course, if we should borrow from the domestic market through treasury bills, which of course Kweku has been hammering on it, that the government is competing and crowding out the private sector as far as interest rate competition is concerned, making the environment so gloomy for the banks to ride up free money, where. But then I think as a country, we're borrowing, right? But then efficient allocation of the funds that comes to us is where we have a problem. I can give you typical examples of some projects that are not yielding anything in the end that I foresee in a short term. I can give you an example of some of the secondary schools and the allocations. Sometimes I drive through the countryside and I realize that we've sunk a lot of money here. In the end, in the short term,
education will lift them out of poverty.
Yeah, but we're looking at a long term. You've borrowed on the Eurobond market for 10 years, and money comes into your fold. Monies are going into what? Social project that its payback is a long term. Then how are you going to pay this money?
So ideally, those money should go into short-term investments.
Exactly. Basically, if you're borrowing to invest in maybe into our petroleum, which we know that the realization of the cash flows are of short term, I don't have problem with that. But then if you intend to borrow from international market, from short-term market, why is it that at a point in time we had to go and borrow from the international market to come and retire short-term, local debt? It calls for so many questions, because at the end of the day, we're not able to match the maturity of our debt, okay, to the projects that we put the project in, the monies in. So it's about leakages and then efficient allocations of the funds that comes available to us. It's not that we're not generating. We have the money, but then how we can use it is the problem.
30 seconds. One good thing about the budget. 30 seconds.
I'll do that. Let me compliment what Doctor. Look, government, because we're overspending, the money we borrow from the domestic market goes to recurrent expenditure.
Yep.
And when it is time to retire, when you borrow and it goes into consumption, you're never going to be able to pay it back. So when it is time to retire, then we go for Eurobond money big to come and settle those ones. So we are just borrowing to consume. One thing good about this budget, as I have indicated, once revenue did not perform because the environment was hostile and the companies were suffering and economic activity has slowed down, we had no choice but to cut expenditure. So if you ask what is one good thing, yes, it would have been terrible if government had said, I'll not cut expenditure, and had decided to borrow all the way to finance everything. Now they say they'll borrow some and they'll cut expenditure. So my problem is with where they cut the expenditure. Yeah. But more importantly, I need government to be telling us why the revenues are falling, why we are a net importer of petroleum. But whenever petroleum prices go down, we complain. Where is the benefit on the import side? Why are fuel prices not going down so that businesses will benefit? These are hard questions government ought to ask itself, so that in future, even if they have to cut, they will cut in ways that will be more friendly to business.
Thank you very, very, very much. But the number you want not to contribute to the show, to get a shirt like what I'm wearing, Tanti's Fashions, who sponsored my shirt, 024 366 2001. 024 366 2001. Give them a call and get yourself a and I shared too well. But Kweku, thank you so much for coming. And Doc, thank you so much for coming. I knew there wasn't going to be enough time, but at least we started.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. I hope tomorrow we'll be back to do this all over again.
Right.
I don't send this,